My name is Mike Quering, and I was born in Glassport, Pennsylvania. It's a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was born on October 12th, 1923. Many of the people that went through the Depression have, if you lived on a farm, you were getting off pretty good. See, you could live off the farm, see. But in an industrial area like I lived in Pittsburgh, within walking distance from our home, you had the Pittsburgh Steel Foundry, you had the Copperwell Steel Foundry, you had the Glass Works, you had the Carnegie Mills, you had the Coke plants, you had five big industries right there. You had five big plants. And during Depression, they were all closed. They were all closed. And many people don't realize what a terrible, terrible time that was back then. There were no jobs. And in our area, there was no WPA either. But it was a black time. It was dark then. It was a dark time back in our part of the country. The one uncle that I had that did have a job worked on the railroad. And he had a job. And that was a saving grace because he helped out the families. And it just became a matter of survival there, see. And of course, everybody in the community, and we lived in a neighborhood where everybody knew everybody. And everybody was in the same boat at the same time. So what you did is you survived on what you could do. See. We recycled a long time before it became popular because they were still buying junk, glass, and metal, and we would go up and down the alleys. We all had alleys in those days. You went up and down, found what you could find and see. A neighbor of ours was a glass man, and once a week we would get in his old truck and we would drive to Menzie Dairy and get all the broken bottles and load them up, and he would take them in. What we would get then was cottage cheese to eat. And we would take whatever they'd give us, and we would bring it home then, see. And then I remember getting a weekend job helping a milkman deliver milk. Okay? Keck's Dairy was the name of that. And your pay was milk. So there weren't any birthday parties or Christmas parties or coming out parties or anything like that. There just weren't any parties. See? But the parties were the Democrats and the Republicans. That's where the parties were, see? Now I can remember, God, this always reminds me, when Alf Landon was running. My mother and a neighbor, Henrietta Bradley was her name. Every Halloween they had a big Halloween parade, see? Now parades were something great back there, especially Labor Day, Armistice Day, and Memorial Day. But anyway, Halloween, people dressed up in costumes. See? Well, my mother and Henrietta dressed up like sunflowers. We couldn't believe, I didn't know that. Nobody knew it. Nobody in the family knew it, see. But anyway, they brown painted their face and made these big yellow leaves and green and they made a robe out of black and green, looked like a sunflower, see. Well, the grand prize was like 25 pounds of sugar. Oh, God, boy, what a deal that was, see. Who brings home the sugar? My mother. And we didn't, and we watched the parade, see? And wonder who those two ladies were. God, that was really something. But that was kind of enjoyment you had. And surprising enough, the communists were making headway. They were making headway. And because there were some terrible, terrible battles between the unionized workers and the companies. So there were a lot of sympathizers back there then. That didn't last too long. You have to realize how strong the Bund was back there, the Germans. See? And I know in a factory, one of the fellows, he spouted off about how great Hitler was and that. Well, the family had to move. They just had to move because there was a violent reaction against them. I can remember I had an uncle who was a barber. Uncle Joe Testa said the best thing that happened to Italy was Mussolini. Mussolini was the best damn thing. Well, listen, when the Japanese attacked and we went to war, that was over, boy. I was working as an usher, part-time usher at the local theater. And Ramona was the film. They were playing Ramona. And nobody came. Looked out on the street, nobody's around. Everything was absolutely quiet. Well, at 2 o'clock, my relief came on. Tony Martino was his name. And he said, how's it going? I said, Tony, nobody's here. He said, well, didn't you know? I said, what do you mean? No? The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So we went into the manager and told him. And that's why nobody was coming. So they closed the theater up because nobody was coming home. So I went home, and every Sunday dinner in those days, you always had a big dinner. And of course, the thing was then they knew, and they all looked at me when I walked in, see? Then, of course, my aunts and my mother all started to cry, see? They figured, well, that was it. Then they know that, eventually I would be going, see? And all my other cousins on my dad's side all had sons that were my age also, see? And then when the war started, that's when the mills started, see? And I can remember as a senior in high school, I worked at the Christie Park Works as a timekeeper. I was a senior in high school, see? And then that was too far for me to travel, see? So then I became a molder's helper in the Pittsburgh Steel Foundry. We would get out of school early and come home. My mother would have my lunch pail and my dinner ready, change clothes, go to work. And we could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if we wanted to. I was a molder's helper. And the moldings that we cast there were gunship, battleship turrets. And you can imagine how big they were. And we also molded for Sherman tanks, the turrets on top of them, see. But this building that we worked was along the Monongahela River. It only had one side. You had a roof, and you had the big girders on either side. They didn't have any sides in the building because the molding castings were so huge that they had to have plenty of room to swing them around in that, see. And our job was to go in after the molder had placed the mold in the flask. Then we would go in, and we had all this sand. And we would pour all that sand in, and then we would tamp it down. We had all those pneumatic tampers, and we tamped that all down like that. Good thing the EPA wasn't around at that time, because the dust was all over the place. And then after that was done, after so many days, then they would lift the wood mold out. They would jerk it out, and then when jerk it out, they would lift it out. Then the molder and the molder's helpers would get inside that mold. And we would get in there, and we would strengthen it by putting nails in it all around. And the molder would make sure that the dimensions were all corrected. And that. Once you got that done, then we would spray it with molasses. Spray it with molasses to set it, and that then see. And then, of course, then you had two parts to the mold, the top and the bottom. Then they were all put together, and then we would C-clamp that, and then they would move that whole thing. And I mean, that damn thing could be huge, and they had to have two cranes to move it, see. Then they would take it over to where they would pour the molten metal into it then, see. Then that would sit for weeks. I graduated from high school in 1943. I went down to downtown Pittsburgh, the Fulton Building. That's where you went. That was the big place where the VA was and the Army recruiters and all that. And if you registered for the draft and chose a branch of the service, you were given preference for that. And I had the opportunity to take the exam to join the Army Air Corps. So I came home, and my mother and dad are sitting up on a swing there. And they said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, I enlisted. I enlisted." Well, my dad really wasn't upset or anything because he was a World War I veteran. And he was gassed, and he was a prisoner of war. But he came out, but he suffered over the years with mustard gas burns. And a month later, I was down in Biloxi, Mississippi, taking basic training. I left Biloxi, Mississippi, went to Berry College in Rome, Georgia, because I was part of the cadet training program, because I didn't have any college education then, see. And the idea of that was they took those that passed the test could attend those colleges. After about eight months of college training there, then we were shipped out to Nashville, Tennessee for classification, either pilot, navigator, or bombardier. We were all given a choice of taking another exam, another test, in either for a radio man, engineer, or gunner. So that's what happened. I was assigned to be trained as an armor gunner. And then I came to Buckley Field, and that's where the armament training was there, see. And after training there, armor gunnery, that was in the maintenance, the care of machine guns, cannons, how to synchronize machine guns flying, shooting through a propeller, which is really something. And it's not always perfect either. Alexandria, Louisiana, and that was for gunner training there, and also for the assembling of a crew. So that's where we were assigned to crew, and the pilot, that included the pilot, the co-pilot, the bombardier, the navigator, the engineer, the radio man, the ball turret gunner, the waist gunners, and the tail gunner. That was a period when we got to know each other, see. And of course that meant that we always had training and flying in that too, see. And we flew many night missions with the navigator and the bombardier, and gunnery training also right there. We were shipped up to Lincoln, Nebraska, and we were assigned a bomber. And I remember that bomber well. We were assigned a B-17 bomber, and we received our orders along with our personal gear and personal arms. We were all issued Colt 45s. We were about 15 minutes out of Lincoln, Nebraska, when we developed engine trouble. So the pilot circled back and radioed the tower and started his approach and landing, and they start shooting off the red flares and said, "Get your goddamn landing gear down." So Papa Roberts did that, and we came around, and we had to stay there another day. After they repaired the bomber, we took off again. We spent a day in Bangor, Maine, and then flew up to Goose Bay in Newfoundland. We spent the night there, and then from Goose Bay we flew to Reykjavik, Iceland. And as we were landing, we got hit with a crosswind and went off the runway, but the ground was frozen, so there was no problem there. The next morning we got up and flew across the Atlantic Ocean and landed in Wales, Valley, Wales. From Valley, Wales, we were in a replacement area, and our crew was assigned to join the 487th Bomb Group in Lavenham, England. And lo and behold, our bomber came there, and we were assigned that same damn bomber. We were assigned that bomber, so we felt like we had an old friend there. We lived in Quonset huts there, and we had either 2 crews or 3 crews within a Quonset hut. But we didn't fly our first mission until November 15th. In the meantime, it was formation flying, gunnery training, ground training. We didn't have much time to loaf around. The day of a mission, you would go to the bulletin board, the squadron headquarters, and they would list the crews that are going to be available for the next day, but you didn't know where you're going to go. So either at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, depending where the mission was going to go, you were awakened by the CQ. He would come in and name off the crew that was scheduled to fly. And we would get up, and the first thing you would do is go up to the mess hall and have breakfast. From the mess hall, you had a choice. You could go to a chaplain, either a Catholic or a rabbi or a Protestant minister, and you get his blessing or receive communion. From there, you went to briefing. The overall briefing was for all the crews and all the pilots, navigators and bombardiers. When you were in the briefing room, everything was closed up, and then they would uncover the map where you're going to go. And it seemed early at that time, if we had 2,700 gallons of gas, we knew we were going to go a long, long way, see. Well, it so happened that from then on, all bombers were filled with 2,700 gallons of maximum capacity of fuel, see. And then you were shown the target, and they would show you where the target was, about fighter escort, the flak corridors you could fly and to avoid and all that. But the pilots, the bombardier, and the navigator would go to their own special briefings. As the armor gunner, it was my responsibility for all the guns. So we would load those all into a carrier, and they would take us over. Once we arrived at the hard stand, I would supervise the loading of the guns. Now the ammunition was already in the bombers. The bombs were in the bomb bay, and I would check the bombs to see what they were set at, make sure that all the guns were loaded, and then the pilot, the bombardiers, and the navigators, and the co-pilots would come down. And the ground crews were very important, especially with the pilots and the engineer, the flight engineer. They got to know him personally and talk to him. And when we would come back from a mission, go over anything that was wrong, anything that happened, anything that looked like it was going to go wrong. We used to get a box of candy bars. We always got a box of candy bars when we took off, see, because they give you good energy. Of course, we had our escape kits, You had a razor blade, you had a saw blade, you had a little miniature compass, and you had lots of pep pills. Lots of pep pills. You know, they talk about truck drivers using them today or pilots using them today in the Air Force and that. You had plenty of pep pills in case you needed them then, see. And along with the pills, you had, or the escape kits, you had the money, you had the francs, you had the marks. Those were the only countries we flew over. And then you also had the silk maps. I still have some of the silk maps that showed the railways, the highways, and the way the rivers flowed, and the cities. And they were all out of silk. We hadn't even taken off. Everybody's smoking already, see? Now you can't get within 5,000 feet to a damn airplane. You can't smoke anymore. Well, to us, that's kind of ridiculous because we knew we were smoking all the time. There were no bathrooms, no relief tubes. If you had to go, boy, you went yourself. And you had to hold it till you got back to base then. We all boarded and we waited for the signal to take off. And you had between 3 and 5 seconds. And we would move off the heart stand and all the bombers would get in line just like this, and one would take off and you're 3 seconds behind them, right there. It could be maybe 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock depending on the weather. And of course the weather was really cold at that time of year in England. Following the coordinates, you would come to the splasher signal, and that's where your group rendezvoused. And you formed up, and from there then you had another signal that you went to form up with a group then. And then you took off for your target then. The losses in the Army Air Corps were pretty horrendous in England because the 8th Air Force was over there in 1942, and of course they flew their first mission July 4th, 1942. And the other thing that people don't realize, when the losses over the target were given, they were given just the planes that were shot down or blew up over the target. It didn't tell about the ones that never made it back, that crash landed, see? And the losses were much more heavier than they ever reported to the American public. See, one of the other hazards that we had, when you're forming up in a fog, or it's daylight, or it's nighttime, and you have other bombers coming through. And there were a lot of accidents then, because we all flew in a tight formation. I can see so many bombers that were flying right next to you, or ahead of you, or below you, or above you, just going down in flames like that, see? And it just, and the only thing you're watching for is to see if any parachutes come out. And coming back, trying to get into the landing landing area. See? I can remember days when the fog was so thick that we always had these signal lamps on board, see? We had 2, and we would get one in the tail and one in the nose. And just keep flashing the damn thing to let other people know there, see? I know we missed the chimney by 100 feet one time. During that war there, it was a war of attrition, that's all it was. I flew 34 missions. When we first started to fly, it was 25 missions. Then they raised it to 30 missions. Then they raised it to 35 missions. Our first mission was to Aachen, Germany, November 15th or 16th, one or the other right there. And that was one of the first big battles that the Army had against the Germans because they were really in great strength there. Our targets were so targeted that we really tried to miss the populated centers, but sometimes it just didn't work out. Because I know in Aachen, We killed a lot of our own men. They went up so fast that we were dropping bombs on them. And what happened was, the lead bombardier, when he was going to drop his bombs, would drop a smoke bomb. And then what they didn't realize at the same time, that the smoke was flowing back. See? And that's when the bombs were dropped. And that's when we made a lot of bad judgments there, see. And there wasn't much ground to air communication either. My war was different from the ground war. You have to realize, in a bomber, we didn't have pressurized cabins. We didn't have heat. The only heat we got were from our heated suits that we had over our underwear, long underwear. And then over that, you put your flight suit on that, see. And you always wore gloves, and you wore silk gloves underneath your heated gloves. Because if you had to handle any metal with your bare hands, you would freeze right to it. Our temperatures varied between 40 below zero to 60 below zero. It was cold. And flying in the waste was bitter, bitter cold. And when you were under attack, the noise was absolutely horrendous. And when you're in a flak area, the flak just scared the hell out of you. That's all. And it wasn't a matter that you weren't afraid. It just where you were just praying that you were able to get to that flak. And I'm sure many people have seen some of the films. The flak was so thick you could land on the damn stuff. When we first started to fly, the waist windows, you had to shove them open like the car doors, on the vans today, and get your guns out. Well, fortunately, our bomber had the plastic over that, and the gun stuck out through the window. I can remember times you've used up so many rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, and we always were on the lookout what we called a hot round that didn't fire, and you'd eject it, and the goddamn thing would explode right next to you. See? Things like that. Now in the way, see, we didn't have any. The spent shells just went there. See, all the other guns they could get rid of their shells. See, but ours just went right on the floor there. Our crew also was a camera crew. Our job was to stay in formation, film all the action, including the dropping of the bombs, and then once the target was hit, we were to take off as quickly as possible without leaving the group until we were safely away from the German fighters. And all this time, you would have flak and fighters, the jet fighters. The first ones we saw were in 1944. We didn't know what they were. They just were a flash. Before you knew it, they flew through the group. And they created havoc and shot down 3 planes before we even knew it. We didn't even know what they were. We were hit by fighters. And I was in the nose turret then. Got hit with a 20 millimeter shell. Right below, the turret hangs down. Got hit right in there. It blew up and started to fire. Of course, it blew part of the nose off. They did have a piece of armor plate right over the top of that right there, because that's where ordinarily the bombardier would be. We took that damn thing and we bent it back. We bent the armor plate back to get to that fire and put it out with an extinguisher that we had in there. We got down on the ground and said, let's see if you can bend that back. No way. It just was that urge of energy. In December 1944, On December 16th, the German army uh, broke through, which became known as the Battle of the Bulge. What really helped win that battle was the Air Force, both the 8th Air Force and the 9th Air Force. The 9th Air Force gave low-level cover. We were able to go after the railroads, the marshalling yards, and the German airfields. Finally, on December 24th, the weather cleared. We were about 5 minutes outside of Liège, Belgium, and we were hit with 60 fighters. They came head on. At first pass, they shot down the lead bomber, which was the one that Brigadier General Castle was in. At the same time, we had over 36 bombers in our group at that time. The low squadron was the one that really got hit bad. Our total losses that day were 13 bombers. It didn't stop our mission. We flew on and bombed our objectives, and when we got back to base, the weather was so bad, Lavenham was about the only base that was cleared. We must have had 200 bombers there. At that time, we didn't have our bombardier with us. And we had what they had, a toggelier, and I became the toggelier then. And what that was, they had a device up in the nose, and the toggelier, we would set our controls on that little system there to drop the bombs the way the lead bombardier wanted them to go. I was flying in the nose at that time because we had a nose gun at that time. And when we were hit on December 24th, I could remember seeing the damn fighters coming by and seeing the damn pilots. That's how close they were, right there. And they just swarmed over us. And that was our worst loss that our group had ever suffered. So we had to stand down about 4 days before we took off any mission because the battle damage was terrible. We had been planning a big Christmas Eve. So the two passes that we had to London, our tail gunner was Jewish. So when we'd go to London, he would go to the Jewish section, the Soho, and we were able to buy scotch, whiskey, any kind of whiskey and wine we wanted. See, and we brought that back, and we were going to have a big Christmas Eve celebration. Well, we didn't have it Christmas Eve. We had it Christmas Day. We all were thoroughly drunk. It just was one of those times when it was a sad Christmas. And then when every Christmas Eve now and Christmas Day, I think of those guys that were lost and the guys in our crew. And it just, it brings back memories. And I have very many memories I can't even remember. I was a teenager, and my maturity happened just like that. There weren't any teenage dances or anything at all, boy. It was just overnight you became mature in a damn big hurry. God, we had replacements, you didn't even get to know them. They were gone before you got to know them. And it really worked out that your core was your crew and the guys you lived with in the barracks in your Quonset hut there. One of the crews on our Quonset was shot down, and we thought they were all killed. Well, in January and February, we finally found out that 4 of them survived. The other 6 were killed. After so many missions, you become gun shy. I mean, you are aware of what's going on around you. You don't take any chances. You're almost like you're frozen. You can see the flak out there. You can see the fighters out there. And here you are. You have no place to hide. You're in this bomber. And you're firing your machine gun at him. And not only that, he's firing and he's trying to kill you. And they were damn good at trying to kill us. And when you see a flak burst, maybe it's 500 yards away from you, you're aware of it right then. And you become almost robotic. You just become robotic, that's all. And your mindset is, you're going to get through this day. You're going to get through this day. And when you come back down, you're mentally worn out. You're just mentally worn out because the tension starts the minute you get up in the morning to go on a mission. You're flying these missions and you're hit by fighters and flak, and you don't know whether you're doing any good or not. You just don't know that. And you find that there are times when you just say, I don't know whether I can do this anymore. Our missions were usually at 20 or 25,000 feet. However, one mission in particular, we flew to Kotblis, which is just on the border of Germany and Czechoslovakia. And that mission was, the primary object of that mission was to help the Russian ground troops there. We came over and were hit with flak. At that time, we had a Mickey operator in the radio room along with our radio man, and his job was to jam the radar. See? Well, that son of a bitch was laying curled up in a fetal position, and we're being nailed by fighters, flak. I mean, I told Joe, no, it wasn't Joe, hell, we got a replacement radio man. I said, get that guy up and come up here and help me, because we only had one waist gunner at that time, see? Oh, I'll tell you, I picked up rounds and start flinging them in there to get that guy up, see? I don't know whatever happened to him, but I sure reported it. Oh, boy, I'll tell you, this is another thing it reminds me, see? We had suicides. We had 2 suicides that committed suicide. They were combat crews. They just couldn't take it anymore. We had one fellow that you've heard the stories about the guy who shot his toe off. Well, that's exactly what the hell he did. He did shoot his toe off, shot himself in the foot because he couldn't fly anymore. We had a ball turret gunner in our, and this has already really ticked me off, boy. I've never gotten over this grudge I've had. A ball turret gunner who refused to fly. What they did to him is they demoted him in ranks and put him on KP. Now at the same time, in that squadron, we had a navigator who refused to fly. They sent him back to the States for mental treatment or something, see. He was a staff sergeant, and of course the navigator was an officer then. But I've never forgotten that, and I've never gotten over that. I thought, boy, what a terrible deal, the real deal this is here. And I can remember times sweating and freezing, praying, cursing, all at the same damn time, because of what was going on out there. See? Just, it's unbelievable. When I think back, it was damn good we were young. It was very, because we could take the pressure that was, and it just, I couldn't do it today, but I could do it then. One thing I could say about our officers, when they had hot water, they always let us know. then they would crack open a window and we'd crawl through the window and go take showers over there, see, because we didn't have any damn hot water very seldom at the time, see. The enlisted men, getting coal for your furnace, that little damn stove, you know. We used to steal coal whenever we could. It was so cold. The weather was so bad. We had snow, but the worst part of the weather was the damn frost was 8-10 inches thick. Just the frost, well, alone. So we were grounded for almost 2 weeks there. And of course, in our Quonset huts, all we had was a little center coal stove in the center of the Quonset hut. And that's was to keep you warm, but when you went to bed that night, at least we had a bed. The ground troops didn't have anything. But I used to wear my long GI underwear, my ODs, wool OD uniform, and a helmet liner cap, and under 8 blankets. That's how cold it was there. When I've gone back to reunions overseas to Lavenham and that, a lot of the people go back because they knew somebody there, but they were ground party. They were what we called permanent party personnel, and they had the chances to go and visit them. I went to London, I think, 3 times. I went to Lavenham maybe 2 times. The rest of the time, when I had time, I was asleep. I would go to sleep. I would just sleep because of the emotional turmoil. And the other thing was, there were many, many times when you got into big time fights just to let off energy. You just really, things could provoke you very quickly. You would fight with whoever was handy. That's all. You would fight, or you'd go up to the sergeant's club, you know, and just get into a big time battle. I remember one time, boy, we were all hauled back to our squadron in a Jeep, you know, the MPs come picked us up, you know, and put you aside, and see, you know, and it was just a matter of, you can't say that about this pilot or that pilot or your shooting or your squadron or anything like that. There was just that, it wasn't animosity or anything like that. It just was, you were ready to do battle. Although they were saying the war was winding down, as far as our group was concerned, it wasn't winding down one damn bit. We knew from past experience, like Merceburg, that was a target that was heavily defended by anti-aircraft gun and fighters. That's where they produce the majority of their synthetic fuel there. And it was heavily defended, and we hated to go on those missions. On February 14th, that was on Valentine's Day, we were flying to Osnabrück. And unbeknownst to us, we inadvertently went over an area where they had many, many flak guns. And our radio man was wounded at that mission there. And of course, he was the only one, but our bomber suffered major damage there, and we were able to manage to get back. However, we were listed missing in action till we were able to land. We got back very late that night then. The next mission I remember so clearly. Now, all this time, we're flying our old bomber. The original bomber that we flew over. March 11th, 1945, our mission was to Hamburg. But a week before that mission, unbeknownst to us, we were given that bomber was transferred to the 839th Squadron. So we got another bomber. On that mission there, that bomber was flying in the same formation we were. And it received a direct hit. and was just blown out of the sky. And that was a real blow to us. It was that was hard to take. That was hard to take there. March 15th, the Ides of March, 1945. Our mission was to Oranienburg, which is almost like a suburb of Berlin. That was a mission. That was our 34th mission. We were on the bomb run, and of course there's flak, and on a bomb run there's no deviation. There's no evasive action. During that period, we were hit with a barrage of anti-aircraft fire. When we came through that barrage, we had 8 wounded, lost a bombardier, and lost the right waist gunner, and that's the one I was wounded in. And we lost 2 engines then, but we were able to make it back. And when we did make it back, it was just by the grace of God that we ever did make it back then, see. So I just, I find it very hard to relive that day, but that was a horrible, horrible day for all of us there. Aside from the 2 that were lost, I was the most severely wounded. When I was wounded, I lost my boots, I lost my heating suit, and I had severe wounds in the stomach and the leg and my shoulder, and my feet were frozen. I was knocked unconscious. All during that period, my mind was black, just black. And what happened was, when I fell, the explosion just kind of tore out the bottom of the bomber, but the ball turret gunner down there was still operating. See? And evidently, when I fell, my arm fell on the cogs in the gears where he ran around, see. So my hand is laying there, and he's trying to move his turret, but he can't because I'm blocking it, see. And then that's when I woke up. When you're flying at altitude, your blood doesn't flow freely. What's happening to it, it's freezing and coagulating right there. And when I awoke, when Bucky was trying to get his ball turret around, I woke up, and then I knew. Fortunately, the one thing that didn't disconnect was my throat mic. So a crew check was called and wanted to know how everybody was, and I was the one that said, well, I'm really hit bad. And I knew I was hit bad because I could see my boots were gone and my suit was tattered and blown open in that scene. Well, nobody could get back because, hell, they had wounded of their own up there. But finally, they did come back then. But the thing I want to point out is, fortunately, when they opened up my first aid kit, there was Novocaine in it. And what we found out was somebody was going through the first aid kits and stealing the Novocaine. See, that was a real blow, boy. And they really put a clamp on the base and locked everything up. All those first aid kits and that weren't available to anybody. Now, we were outside of Berlin, and we were probably maybe 4 hours before I got back. And I sure don't know what happened after we got back from that 34th mission, when we were just shot to hell. Just shot to hell. We must have had over 400 holes in that airplane, besides some big one where I was. When you have wounded aboard, the incoming bombers have first right to land, and they fire the red flares. The minute you're down, the ambulances are there. They provide safe first aid right away. They tried to give you something to drink. I said, I can't drink anything. I'm thirsty though. I'm thirsty. Oh my God, I can't believe how thirsty I was. Uh, so you go back in, and I know I got right to the hospital, the operating room right there. Uh, at the station hospital. They operated on me right there, and I can remember saying, I'm going to throw up. They said, what's holding you back? So anyway, but I could hear them. I could hear them, even though I was under. I could hear the clang, clang, clang. They were taking the flak out of my bones up in my leg here, you know. Then later on, he finally did give it to me. They finally gave it to me. They didn't sew me up right away. You know, they just, you'd get the penicillin shots, and they dusted my wounds with powder, sulfa powder that they had at that time, see. This was the first time I became acquainted with eggnog. Every morning, you would get a big mug of eggnog to drink, see. Boy, I thought that was the best thing in the world. I can't stand it now. And I got to a station hospital, then sent to a general hospital, and I was there from March 15th till right after VE Day. After about March 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, that's when the troops made the crossing of the Rhine. And I'll tell you, from then on, they were bringing in guys by the plane loads. They were in every bed, in the day rooms, the hallways, everywhere. That's how many wounded were being brought in at that time. Many of the badly wounded were brought in body cast, you know, full body cast and all that, because that was the safest way that they could treat them at that time and get them back to England. And some of those body casts really smelled. And when they start cutting them open, I mean, it was really, really bad news. I mean, you could just smell it. It permeated the whole hospital. And that's it. Well, I'll tell you, after that, you didn't get any more eggnog. When I was in the hospital, they brought my .45 sidearm to me, see? And I kept it under my pillow. Of course, that's a big no-no, too, see? I was surprised when they gave it to me. So I kept it under my pillow. You know, somebody stole it from me. But I had fully intended to bring it back. But somebody beat me to it, and see. And whenever I see a .45, I look at the serial number, because I have a sheet that issued to me the serial number of that gun. Before I was discharged, you could, you know, get up and walk and put on your uniform and go to the daycare center, the day room. And I put on my uniform, and I was a staff sergeant, see. And this kid was in the infantry. And he said, my God, you're a staff sergeant. And I said, yeah. That was pretty funny to me, and I thought, oh boy. All it meant to me was an extra pay. I went back to the base, Lavenham, to collect my personal gear. And when I checked into the squadron headquarters, they were glad to see me and said, well, don't unpack your bag because we're going to the South Pacific. I came back on a hospital ship, and that's another thing that really ticked me off. We were finally at a level where they could disembark. You know, had the big doors there. See? I thought, God damn, I finally got a break. Most of us were wounded on there, see. However, what happened was, all the officers got off first. They got off first. You know, and I thought, God damn, I was really ticked. Had a 30-day furlough. with my folks. And then and when I got home, I was I was about the only one that was home at that time of my high school friends and that. And then from there, I went to uh, Santa Clara, California, for rehabilitation. And after I spent some time there and rehabilitated, I came back to Laurie Field and received a medical discharge then from here in October 1945. When I came to Denver at Buckley Field, man, I really liked it here. I really liked it. At Buckley Field, they had a PT field, a physical training field, and you could look from there all the way out to the mountains. And sometimes you could see part of downtown. And the water was so good. You could drink the water. I mean, you didn't need anything else. The water was so good and cold and that. I thought, I'd really like to come back here. And so I started a year at Duquesne, and I decided I'm coming back to Colorado. So then I registered at Regis University. I knew it was a Catholic college, and Duquesne was, and I'm a Catholic, and I decided to come here. And that's why I came back here to Regis University, then, or Regis College then. We had a veterans club there because most of the students at that time were veterans. And but it was just a veterans club. You didn't talk about the war. We used to go to the Potenza, the Italian club over in North Denver there, and we would buy the beer and have a dance. You never talked about the war. I took economics and business administration, and I graduated in 1949. And I came back in 47, got married in 1947, and married a girl that I met at a USO dance here, at the Knights of Columbus. And Catherine and I got married, and we were married for 48 years before she passed away. My wife died 9 years ago, all of a sudden, and it was a big shock to me and to the kids and the family and all our friends and that. She was a nurse. She went back to school, became a nurse when she was 50 years old. And she became a nurse and graduated the same class and year that